Indomitable Heart by Renette. Chapter 18. Django sat up slowly, reaching for the steaming mug of shig he smelled close at hand. This, they had already decided, would be his last pregnancy. When the war had ended, he and Obi-Wan had decided they wanted another Ik'aad, and Django would soon grown heavy with their second, named Dral'Han, after Django's mother. The babe in his belly now would be the third he carried. Django felt every year of his age these days, though, and while he would happily welcome this little one, any other Adiike would need to be adopted. His body just didn't bounce back as it once had. Shuffling to his feet, Django washed up and dressed and went out into the central room of the sprawling house. The sun was already well over the horizon, so Obi-Wan would be out in the fields with his Padawan Khalifa and the other Jedi, helping the more agriculturally inclined Vode who had settled around them. They lived in a marginal area where the northern habitable zone of Manda'yaim faded into the harsh white sand deserts left after Dral'Han. A small group of Jedi had joined them there, mostly comprised of the other Knights and Masters who had volunteered for the Guard during the war and adapted to Mando customs and mores and been adopted as Mando'a in turn. There was an academy too, where the majority of the Force-sensitive clones, his own offspring, and the children of the others in the settlement trained as both Mando'a and Jedi. Their numbers were bolstered with young Mando Force sensitives brought from throughout the Mando sector by parents who wanted them trained in Jedi skills, but also in the Mando tradition. Arla and the Vode she had claimed as her own, and joined them on Manda'yaim too, and Arla had taken to running the attached creche, which provided community daycare services for those too young for formal education. Until recently, Dral'Han had spent her days there. Nowadays, she was old enough to begin her formal schooling. Boba was in the main room of the house, cleaning his Beskar gammon weapons. Django smiled at his son, a teenager now, and finishing his training under Miles and Silas, who managed the day-to-day clan business for the Hot Mando'a. The Beskar gown was forged from Django's, remade to fit Baba's slighter form. It would have to be recast a few times before Baba stopped growing, but that would just give Django more chances to impart his skills and knowledge on how to cast and forge armor. It might be a bit antiquated to the rest of the galaxy, but it was the Mando way. "Bavodu Anakin left a message," Baba said in greeting, jerking his stubbled chin at the Khan. Django grunted and went over, playing the hollow. Padme had given birth, a boy they were calling Quinn after Anakin's finder. Their older twins, Luke and Leia, were between Django and Obi-Wan's Mira and Rusan in age, and their second daughter, Corday, was a bit younger than Rusan. With the reforms in the Jedi Order, Anakin had happily taken up the post of watchman on Naboo. A small Jedi and Vode community had grown up around him there, with many of the Vode staring after Padme's former handmaidens in mere worship at first. Django wasn't surprised when some of them eventually paired off and started families of their own, giving Luke and Leia plenty of other children to play with. "Want to go meet your new cousin on Naboo?" Django asked. "Yeah," Baba said with a sweet smile. Django was glad that there was still some boyishness left in his eldest, a softness that had been forced out of Django far younger. Django smiled in response and ruffled Baba's short curls on his way into the kitchen. After a light meal, Django went to the creche and amused himself with the little ones there. He and Arla spoke about the progress the Adiike were making, Arla's eyes resting, as they so often did, on her own adopted children. At midday, Obi-Wan and Khalifa came in from the fields, and Mira and Rusan came home from the school for the meal at Django and Obi-Wan's home, the largest in their settlement. They tucked in happily, enjoying the simple but delicious food, sharing tales and information. Django leaned into Obi-Wan's side, amazed as he almost always was now by how much had changed. Neither he nor Obi-Wan wore armor anymore, and despite having fought so hard against his original assignment as a farmer for the Agricorps, Obi-Wan was happiest these days in the fields, helping extend the green areas a little further into the desert each year, slowly reclaiming Manda'yaim from the blistering sun and sands. That wasn't to say Obi-Wan was no longer a Jedi. He would be a Jedi until the day he died. It was simply part of who Obi-Wan was. Beyond that, he went on missions, although mostly in Mando space, and had taken as his Padawan an intrepid girl a few years younger than Ahsoka. Every year, the Jedi in the settlement would make the trip to Coruscant at least once, sometimes to stay for a few months, other times for only a few days. The temple there at the core of the Republic was still the nerve center of their order, but the Jedi had spread throughout the galaxy now, even on non-Republic-aligned worlds like Mandalore, offering their help to all who sought them, and offering Force training even to those who would never become Jedi. It was something of a trial run still, at the insistence of Master Dooku. Spreading out brought them closer to the public they served, the now frail master had argued, and allowed them a greater understanding of what their constituent communities really needed. Jango certainly wasn't going to complain. It meant he could honor his position as Mandalore without being separated so often or so long from his Riduur. "You saw Adike's message?" Jango asked that night as he and Obi-Wan settled down together, and Obi-Wan nodded, sleepily nuzzling against Jango. "When do you want to leave?" Jango asked, and Obi-Wan chuckled softly. 2 days, Obi-Wan offered, knowing it took them longer to get things organized these days. "Boba want to come?" I think he's got a crush on Lady Ipalana." "At least they're close in age," Obi-Wan said with a chuckle. Jango huffed softly, knowing what his Riduur meant. Some of the Vode had trouble finding mates, their bodies and minds those of full adults, but the years they'd actually lived far shorter. Some looked at them as the-hearted veterans and didn't understand they hadn't ever had lives outside the Gar before the war. While the troopers had been trained to function in myriad situations, that education was somewhat lacking, as it focused mainly on skills and facts that would be useful to a soldier. Adjusting to civilian life for those who had chosen that path took time and effort, and not all potential partners were understanding of that. There had been more than a few broken hearts along the way. Most Vode were settling into post-war life now that the war had been over for 5 years. Many had remained soldiers for a few years in the aftermath, filling out security forces on numerous planets where they were in high demand. Others happily found new paths as civilians, becoming doctors and mechanics and farmers and teachers as it suited them. And two, not a few, became members of the Jedi Service Corps, like those who worked to revitalize the deserts of Manda'yaim. If Jango had thought much about his future back when he took the contract on Dral'Han, he'd have guessed he'd be a bounty hunter and mercenary his whole life. He would have guessed that he would die in the warring of the clans. He'd had no thought then of a partner, of children, of a legacy that would follow him long after his name was but a memory. Then a fiery little jetty had caught his eye, had sworn his light and life to Jango. No, Jango would never have imagined a man on his third chance, his second master, might become his first and only love. But Obi-Wan had settled to Jango's side, and while they had separated at times to accomplish their goals and fulfill their duties, they were together, and always would be, bound by love and loyalty. It was a prize unlooked for, and Jango knew that when the time came for him to go marching far away, even then they would be together, their souls linked in the Mando'a. End of Indomitable Heart by Renette. If you enjoyed this recording or the content, feel free to leave a comment below or a review of the original story from the link in the descriptions. Super thanks and memberships are also available. Thank you for listening.